Yo, what up, everybody? In the OT.com, we're getting so excited for the 2010-11 hockey season. I've got with me our resident hockey expert, Mr. Bradley Howard Fox, and we're going to start with the Western Conference Contenders out west on the coast in BC, the Vancouver Canucks. What do they have to do to get to the Stanley Cup? What have they done in the offseason to get themselves over the hump and get past the second round?
I think when you look at what other additions, teams around them have made, and when you look at who addressed their weaknesses the most, you got to say the Canucks did all of that in spades. They addressed their back end, their fragile back end, and adding two guys in Dan Hamhuis and Keith Ballard who perennially don't miss hockey games. These guys are healthy, solid defenders. They both bring offense and they bring some solid defensive, physical presence. They also added Rafi Torres and Manny Malhotra, who are terrific, gritty guys who can also chip in with some offense, and those were their two biggest needs.
Yes, absolutely. Now, when you look at Vancouver, we know they've got the offense. The Sedins are going to roll. Kessler, great second-line center. When Burrows is healthy, he's going to be there. Great, gritty player. Mason Raymond's improving. No one can question the offensive depth on this team. They're going to score goals. But what we saw in the playoffs was them get exposed defensively and in net. In my opinion, Luongo played absolutely atrocious last year in the playoffs. Yes, there were defensive breakdowns, but if he's going to continue to command the salary that he does, it's inexcusable to have the second worst goals against and save percentage out of all the starting goalies in the NHL. Do you think getting rid of the captaincy is going to alleviate that pressure with the extra help on the back end? There's now enough depth that if there's a couple of injuries, they should be fine.
Well, yes, I think the captaincy will help alleviate some of that pressure, but so will other things. To have a steady backup goaltender in Corey Schneider, that they want to build his value, they want to play him more games. He might play 15, maybe even 20 games. They're going to keep Luongo fresh. He's going to be fresher for the playoffs, and he's going to be good down the stretch. Also, full-time goalie coach brought in, Rolly Melanson. He's probably...
All right, enough with the goalie coaches. Vancouver's going to be there. They have an easy division. It's not even going to be a question. It just comes down to how they're going to perform in the playoffs, and we'll monitor that all year. All right, we got the Detroit Red Wings here. This team is always a perennial contender because of the way they're built. Zetterberg, Datsuk, they're outstanding. Point-per-game players, could get 90, low-end 75. They're going to bring it defensively. Both great checkers, two-way players. They can do anything you ask them to do on the team. Great role players. We got Franzen, we got Flipula, Holmstrom, big, tough guys that go to the net. Plus, they have some scoring touch as well. And then you've also got Todd, who seemed to have found a role, even though I can't stand his pathetic mug.
Yeah.
And then Danny Cleary, the guy who was basically put on waivers, is a resurgent third-line player. You bring in Mike McDowell playing his home state. What's there not to like about the offense?
Yeah, and you've got a lot of other guys. You've got Yuri Hudler coming in back from Europe. He's going to really step in. And as you said, Mike McDowell, somehow this guy is going to find his game in Detroit, and he's going to be able to bring it for another season and help them. And in addition, you've got Jimmy Howard. Finally, they have a solid starter, number one goalie. There's none of this Chris Osgood shenanigans. You got Babcock, knows who he's going to throw out there for the majority of games, and that's why I look to them as continuing to reign at the top of the West. It's a great balance of youth and veteran presence.
Yeah, especially on the back end when you got guys like Lidstrom, a perennial Norris Trophy winner. The guy plays 30 minutes
Brad
a game.
Stewart.
Brian Rafalski, the guy's a great offensive defenseman. And Nicky Kronwall is basically like an understudy to Lidstrom. This guy can anchor a lot of defenses in the NHL, but he's sitting number 3 on the depth chart. Detroit, mighty fine. They'll be in it the whole year. Now we're going to move on to the defending Stanley Cup champions, the Chicago Blackhawks, who many people believe have lost some of their depth this year moving forward, which might sort of bring them back to the pack a little bit. But you know what? I'm not going to buy it. I'll tell you why. Because Kanan Taves, Sharp, Hossa, their 4 best forwards, they didn't lose any of them. Their top 3-4 defensemen, they didn't lose any of them. And you know what's amazing about this team? These kids are so young, and they're only getting better.
Yeah, it's true. They are getting better. You can't overlook the loss of toughness in Dustin Byfuglien and Andrew Ladd. But overall, even though they lost their Stanley Cup winning goalie, they brought in Marty Turco. And you can say what you want about Marty Turco. He was playing behind a pretty bad defense in Dallas last year. And now with Seabrook and Keith and
Nicky Charlinson.
Yeah, exactly. Charlinson, who was almost snatched up by San Jose in an offer sheet. They still retain him. That's one hell of a top 3 with one hell of a skill set. And I look for Marty Turco to really help them out.
And even just addressing the sort of players that they lost, you said Byfuglien, Ladd, also Versteeg is gone. You know what? I don't see any issues with that because I look at other players in the organization to step up and have a bigger role. like a David Bolin playing more minutes.
Yeah, for sure. They also
like
brought
a Troy Brouwer, who was almost out. These guys can step in. That's why everyone's just overreacting. They didn't lose any of their key players.
Yeah.
San Jose Sharks, the regular season Kings, who actually had a great playoff performance, making it all the way to the Western Finals last year.
Yeah, the San Jose Sharks, they smell blood in the water, and they know when to go for it when there's some weaker teams around them. And San Jose, man, I'll tell you, I mean, they brought Marleau back. Some thought he might walk, and he came off a massive season last year after getting rid of pathetic Ron Wilson. So he's good, and you got the guys like Logan Couture and many other boys to help really.
Well, one thing about that is like they have the three guys, the three big guys that everyone knows: the Marleau, the Thornton, the Heatley, right? But one thing that I think that really made San Jose sort of get over that hump last year,
that secondary unit.
Exactly, the pressure isn't on Thornton. Everyone just bagged on this guy. He's a playoff choker, this and that. Guess who led them in the first round?
Joe
Pavelski, Ryan Clough. These guys can score. Devin Setoguchi, he had a bit of a down year, but don't forget, this guy was a great rookie a few years ago. When you have two solid lines like that, it doesn't require so much pressure being on the number one unit. And when one line's having an off night, you can rely on the other guys to step up. So offensively, I think they're going to be fine. The question that I have is on the back end, do they have enough depth, especially Rob Blake retiring?
Yeah, they lost Rob Blake, and I mean, you don't really know how they're going to hold up with that. But they did bring in one key component on the defensive line, and that's the last line of defense. And he comes in the form of Antti Niemi, Stanley Cup winning goaltender. So that's just going to do loads for them, and they also that's probably really going to help them.
Yep. And I mean, just for San Jose, I think they'll be in the mix. I don't know if they've got enough depth after the top two lines. There's a lot of question marks after losing the ultra sort of grit guy in the third line. And, I mean, even though they lost last year in the Western Finals in a sweep, that was probably as close as you can get in a sweep. I mean, every game is a one-goal game.
Yeah, the games could have gone either way.
Exactly. And Nabokov wasn't special anyways. I'm glad to see them part ways with someone that never really played great in the playoffs anyways for that money. Now, going south down the I-5 to L.A., the city of Hollywood, Lipstick City. Well, you know what? Finally, the fans are back into it there, and it hasn't been this much hype surrounding the Kings since Gretzky came and Bruce McNall's gutted chin was up in the press box in the early 90s. And that is because the way this team has been built by Taylor, and he is drafted properly, and they've slumped for many years. But I look at this team as how Chicago was a few years ago, and it starts on the back end with two blue-chip, young stud prospect defensemen, Drew Doughty and Jack Johnson. Yeah,
Jack Johnson. We're not talking about the guy that picks up the guitar in Hawaii. We're talking about a stud defenseman who often gets overlooked because of how stud Drew Doughty is.
The kid's 20 years old, Drew Doughty. He could be just as good as a Duncan Keith. Maybe not quite as physical right now, but when you look back to the Olympics, he was just amazing.
Yeah, he was Canada's best defenseman at the Olympics, and I look at what he did against Vancouver. He almost single-handedly beat Vancouver in the playoffs last year. This guy is probably going to get nominated for a Norris Trophy this year. He's creative, he's big, he's tough, and he's got a desire, and he doesn't have that gut anymore. This guy's very determined to win. And you also look at who they have in goal. Will Jonathan Bernier step up and take the reins between the pipes?
I think Jonathan Quick's still holding it down.
Well, we'll see what happens.
And that's their biggest question, really, because you don't know there, but at least they have an option in terms of youth for who to go to. Now, up front, I really like what they've done there because they have depth. Anji Kopitar, the young kid from Slovenia. Yes, not Slovakia. Slovenia, a country that isn't exactly known for hockey. He is the young buck forward to look to. I think he could be a 90-point player leading the forwards up front. And I love the mixture of players out. They have the skill with a Anji Kopitar. They've got the sort of size and the grit with the Ryan Smith and a Dustin Brown who's willing to bang and go to the front of the net, a Jarrett Stoll type of guy, Wayne Simmons who's got some speed and a little bit of aggression in his hockey game as well.
Yeah, there's also another player who may not make the team out of training camp, but in Braden Shen, if he can get called up or if he can even start with the big club, he's slightly injured right now, but if he can stick around with the team, this is a guy who could be an impact player, especially after he gets some confidence after playing some games in the NHL. But you also got big number 8, Willie Mitchell, big Willie style over there. Going to be shutting
with
down.
Rob Scuderi, so I mean they have some good veteran defensive guys to supplement these young kids too.
It's a formidable top 4.
Yeah, and same with the forwards. I mean, even you look at a guy like Michael Handzus, good third line checking center, and they even brought in Pocahontas, Alexei Ponikarovsky, sort of a swap for Frolov. I think Frolov's got a little bit more upside, but they're not really losing much there. Yeah. You anticipate these young kids getting better, and I see this LA King team doing a lot of damage, and they could surprise a lot of teams, and I think have a real good chance of coming out of the West this year.